All right, welcome. Welcome to Cache Valley Unitarian Universalist, also known as CVUU. Here at CVUU, we strive to keep open minds in our search for truth and meaning in the spirit of justice, equity, and compassion. We recognize the dignity and inherent worth of each individual. All seekers with an open and loving heart are welcome. My name is George Wooten, and I am the worship associate today. This morning, I'm serving as the worship associate, and I'll be doing that a lot more as Sandra's stepping down and I'm stepping into Sandra's role. CVU is a small lay-led congregation relying mainly on members and friends to provide our worship, content, and programs. Unitarian Universalism draws from many sources, including religion, science, nature, and personal experience. We at CVUU draw our services from members and friends, community organizations, and other Unitarian Universalist congregations. Thanks, Dylan. Yay, thanks, Dylan. Dylan's from Ogden. Each week, we might discuss topics important to our lives and practice, hear from community leaders about issues here in Cache Valley, or have a member share their beliefs and journey with us. In our diverse community, we welcome and encourage all to participate in our services and any other activities members of our congregation might organize, even if they are new to our group or just passing through. Before we quiet and center ourselves at the sound of the chime, I invite you to recognize and connect with individuals gathering here this morning, as well as those on Zoom, by turning to greet those around you.
Stolen Ash.
Hey, how's it going? Good to see you.
Everybody's fine. Not sure how this should be. We'll figure that one out. All right. The flaming chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism. The flames of chalices lit around the world represent a faith connected in action. Please join me in the chalice lighting words that are located in the order of service or in that little card or okay. We light this chalice. It is not the number of books you read, nor the variety of sermons you hear, nor the amount of religious conversation in which you mix, but it is the frequency and the earnestness with which you meditate on these things until the truth in them becomes your own and a part of your being that ensures your growth. Frederick William Robertson. Lindy. Okay, so this is Psalm 184.
Yeah. Very book number 184. This is our open meter Buddhist quote. The lamps unto yourselves, so just kind of follow me. Please feel free to stand as you're willing and able. Just like this. Be ye lamps unto yourselves. Be of confidence. Hold to the truth within yourselves. As to the only Lamb. Now you do it, or you know what? Let's do it 2 more times. Be lamps unto yourselves. Be of confidence. Hold to the truth within yourselves. Your confidence, hold to the truth within yourself. As to the only lambs.
Thank you, Wendy. Hey, Joe, you want to come up and share a story?
Oh, you know I do.
All right.
We are gonna read one of my favorite stories. If there are any people who would like to see the pictures better, feel free to come up to the front. This is Harold and the Purple Crayon by Crockett Johnson. And Harold does some searching and seeking in this story, so it kind of goes with the theme of the day. One evening, after thinking it over for some time, Harold decided to go for a walk in the moonlight. There wasn't any moon, and Harold needed a moon for a walk in the moonlight, and he needed something to walk on. He made a long straight path so he wouldn't get lost, and he set off on his walk, taking his big purple crayon with him. But he didn't seem to be getting anywhere on the long straight path, so he left the path for a shortcut across a field, and the moon went with him. The shortcut led right to where Harold thought a forest ought to be. He didn't want to get lost in the forest, so he made a very small forest with just one tree in it. It turned out to be an apple tree. The apples would be very tasty, Harold thought, when they got red. So he put a frightening dragon under the tree to guard the apples. It was a terribly frightening dragon. It even frightened Harold. He backed away, his hand holding the purple crayon shook. Suddenly, he realized what was happening, but by then Harold was over his head in an ocean. He came up thinking fast, and in no time he was climbing aboard a trim little boat. He quickly set sail, and the moon sailed along with him. After he had sailed long enough, he made land without much trouble. He stepped ashore on the beach, wondering where he was. The sandy beach reminded Harold of picnics, and the thought of picnics made him hungry. So he laid out a nice, simple picnic lunch. There was nothing but pie, but there were all 9 kinds of pie that Harold liked best. When Harold finished his picnic, there was quite a lot left. He hated to see so much delicious pie go to waste. So Harold left a very hungry moose and a deserving porcupine to finish it up. And off he went, looking for a hill to climb to see where he was. Harold knew that the higher up he went, the farther he could see, so he decided to make the hill into a mountain. If he went high enough, he thought, he could see the window of his bedroom. He was tired, and he felt he ought to be getting to bed. He hoped he could see his bedroom window from the top of the mountain. But as he looked down over the other side, he slipped, and there wasn't any other side of the mountain. He was falling in thin air. But luckily, he kept his wits and his purple crayon. He made a balloon, and he grabbed onto it. And he made a basket under the balloon, big enough to stand in. He had a fine view from the balloon, but he couldn't see his window. He couldn't even see a house. So he made a house with windows, and he landed the balloon on the grass in the front yard. None of the windows was his window. He tried to think where his window ought to be. He made some more windows. He made a big building full of windows. He made lots of buildings full of windows. He made a whole city full of windows. but none of the windows was his window. Couldn't think where it might be. He decided to ask a policeman. The policeman pointed the way Harold was going anyway, but Harold thanked him. And he walked along with the moon, wishing he was in his room and in bed. Then suddenly Harold remembered. He remembered where his bedroom window was when there was a moon. It was always right around the moon. And then Harold made his bed. He got in and drew up the covers. The purple crayon dropped on the floor and Harold dropped his sleep. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So I have a copy of that book at home with my very first signature in it. I was born in 1954, so it's an old book. Okay, can we sing the children off?
We now have the words on the screen, so for those who don't know it, there it is.
All right, all right. So go now in peace.
Go now in peace. May the Spirit surround you everywhere.
Go. We each come to worship with our own experiences, shaping how we feel. Because we were a small lay-led congregation without a full-time minister, it is necessary we minister to each other. In that spirit, we like to set aside a few minutes to invite you to share your sorrows that weigh heavy on your heart today, or any joys that may be lifting up your spirit. We all have emotions that we would rather not have to keep inside. If you are feeling this today, please take this opportunity to share. In this supportive community, let us reflect together on the uniqueness of each individual through the unison meditation on joys and sorrows located on the slips of paper in your chair or as we project it up on the screen. We gather in unity, sometimes to fear, sometimes to trust, sometimes to joy. But always in hope, that we can support and be strengthened by one another in our common quest for healing and wholeness. I invite anyone who would like to share a joy or a sorrow to come forward now, light a candle, and for those on Zoom, you just pop your hand up and we'll be happy to light a candle for you. Okay.
Right. This is number 291. The Duncan Sings Five. That's a free. So I want to set the stage for you before we start this one. You're at a little party and you've already had 3 beers and 2 bratwursts and you're all gonna sing. The louder the better. Please feel free to stand as you're willing and able.
Are we serving beers and bratwurst?
No, you got to imagine it, sorry. Next week. Just picture, yeah, right, yeah, this is all in your thoughts. Thoughts are free. Ready, here we go. Dear Duncan, sing fire, my thoughts will power. Dear Duncan, sing fire, my thoughts will power. No scholar can map them, no hunter can trap them, no one can deny. Dear Duncan, sing fire. Good. Here we go. My thoughts are as free as the wind or the ocean, and no one can see their form or their motion. No hunter can find them, no trapper can find them. My lips may be still, but I think that I will. Just a second. Here we go. Our glimmering fire, darkness will brighten my soaring desire. All troubles can lighten, no prison enfold me. These walls cannot hold me, no captive I'll be, for my spirit is free.
Hey,
Almost wanted to dance.
Yeah,
Dylan, do you want to come up and do your?
absolutely. So my opening reading today is from a newspaper column that George Orwell wrote. And the title of the column, the weekly column, was As I Please. And this is one section from the December 27th, 1946 edition. Somewhere or other, I think it was in the preface to St. Joan, Bernard Shaw remarks that we are more gullible and superstitious today than we were in the Middle Ages. And he cites as an example of modern credulity the widespread belief that the earth is round. The average man, says Shaw, can advance not a single reason for thinking that the earth is round. He merely swallows this theory because there is something about it that appeals to the 20th century mentality. Now, Shaw is exaggerating, but there is something in what he says. And the question is worth following up for the sake of the light it throws on modern knowledge. Just why do we believe that the earth is round? I'm not speaking of the few thousand astronomers, geographers, and so forth who could give ocular proof or have a theoretical knowledge of the proof, but of the ordinary newspaper reading citizen, such as you and me. As for the flat earth theory, I believe I could refute it. If you stand by the seashore on a clear day, you can see the masts and funnels of invisible ships passing along the horizon. This phenomenon can only be explained by assuming that the Earth's surface is curved. But it does not follow that the Earth is spherical. Imagine another theory called the oval Earth theory, which claims that the Earth is shaped like an egg. What can I say against it? Against the oval Earth man, the first card I can play is the analogy of the sun and the moon. The oval Earth man promptly answers that I don't know by my own observation that those bodies are spherical. I only know that they are round. And they may perfectly well be flat discs. I have no answer to that one. Besides, he goes on, what reason have I for thinking that the earth must be the same shape as the sun and moon? Can't answer that one either. My second card is the earth's shadow. When cast on the moon during eclipses, it appears to be the shadow of a round object. But how do I know, demands the oval Earth man, that eclipses of the moon are caused by the shadow of the earth? The answer is that I don't know, but have taken this piece of information blindly from newspaper articles and science booklets. Defeated in the minor exchanges, I now play my queen of trumps, the opinion of the experts. The astronomer royal, who ought to know, tells me that the earth is round. The oval Earth man covers the queen with his king. Have I tested the astronomer royal's statement? And would I even know a way of testing it? Here, I bring out my ace. Yes, I do know one test. The astronomers can foretell eclipses, and this suggests that their opinions about the solar system are pretty sound. I am therefore justified in accepting their say-so about the shape of the earth. If the oval Earth man answers, what I believe is true, that the ancient Egyptians who thought the sun goes around the earth could also predict eclipses, then bang goes my ace. I have only one card left, navigation. People can sail ships around the world and reach the places they aim at by calculations which assume that the earth is spherical. I believe that finishes the oval Earth man, though even then he may possibly have some kind of counter. It will be seen that my reasoning for thinking that the earth is round are rather precarious ones. Yet this is an exceptionally elementary piece of information. On most other questions, I should have to fall back on the expert much earlier and would be less able to test his pronouncements. And much the greater part of our knowledge is at this level. It does not rest on reasoning or on experiment, but on authority. And how can it be otherwise when the range of knowledge is so vast that the expert himself is an ignoramus as soon as he strays from his own specialty? Most people, if asked to prove that the earth is round, would not even bother to produce the rather weak arguments I have laid out above. They would start off by saying that everybody knows the earth to be round, and if pressed further, would become angry. In a way, Shaw is right. This is a credulous age, and the burden of knowledge which we now have to carry is partly responsible. And then I can just leave up the sharing because I think that's anything in between. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to introduce Dylan here. You've already had a little view into his sense of humor, which we are so grateful for. Dylan's a very special guest here. Dylan is the president of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ogden. And we are in the process of trying to strengthen the communication between our two congregations. And as part of that, Dylan is here today. In a month, I'm going to go down and talk about who should not be a Unitarian Universalist. And I'm going to go to Ogden and talk about that. So I just want you to please help me in welcoming Dylan. Dylan's on faculty at Weber State University. He's also the president, and keeping the Unitarian Universalist spirit alive in Northern Utah. So Dylan, please.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you so much, George, for that introduction. And just along those lines, a few more things. So as Admiral Stockdale memorably said 30 years ago, who am I? Why am I here? Well, as George said, my name is Dylan Zwick, and I'm the board president of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ogden. My being here today is part of a mutual effort between our churches to get to know our fellow Northern Utah Unitarians, and I'm pleased and honored to be joining you here today. Thank you for having me. I've often characterized Unitarianism as a refugee religion. In that for many, if not most of us, the question, in what religion were you raised, will prompt the story of an interesting and unfortunately often painful journey. I'm then somewhat a rarity among our members in that I'm actually a third generation member. My paternal grandparents, my mother, my father, and myself are or were all active Unitarians. It's a religion, a tradition, and a community that I'm proud to call my own and that I'm glad to share. And this is my grandmother's membership certificate in the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City, or as it was called, the First Unitarian Society, from June 4th, 1950. And that's me getting married in the First Unitarian Church on June 30th, 2018. The subject of my talk today is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. This is the fourth principle of Unitarian Universalism, and honestly, it's my favorite, as I think it is the foundation upon which all other principles are built. We must, I believe, first know what is true before we can reason about what is right. And as with all other principles, it sounds straightforward, obvious, and perhaps even easy, but in practice, it is not. And its difficulty becomes revealed upon examination. First, what do we mean when we say truth? I think we all have some idea that there is an objective, singular reality out there with which we exist and interact, and that this reality exists independently of us and our thoughts about it. But assuming that is true, how are we to know it? Our senses, which are our primary, if not our only way of interacting with reality, are made up of input signals imperfectly captured by systems throughout our body, and then assembled by our brain into perceptions that are at best a woefully incomplete model of the environment in which we live. Think for a minute about how almost anywhere in the world I can send you a text message, and wherever you are in the world, it will show up on your phone within a few seconds. The message doesn't know where you are when it leaves my phone. It looks for you everywhere. What this means is that every moment of every day, almost every single text message being sent throughout the country, if not the world, is passing through your body, and you are completely unaware. And this is only a tiny part of the amazing set of electromagnetic signals that are invisibly all around us. We see literally only a very, very small part. 500 years ago, people knew almost nothing about this. What else about the everyday world with which we interact do we not know today? I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure it isn't nothing. And on top of all of this, the physicists, the people whose job it is more than any other to figure out the nature of objective reality, tell us that at its fundamental level, our reality is a superposition of multiple realities that break off from each other when observed and never touch again. So it might not even be the case that there is fundamentally one reality, at least in any sense that is intuitive to us. If our ability to understand the world around us is so imperfect and constrained, what then can we possibly say is true? I will posit that these observations of the difficulty inherent in discerning what is true do not mean that the search is meaningless or of no value. Far from it. Rather, they illuminate its difficulty and the need to be humble, uncertain, and approximate within our search. Now, there is a temptation when faced with the difficulties inherent in discerning truth to conclude that truth is relative. And that perhaps instead of the truth, it is better to speak of my truth and your truth. Frankly, I could see this being an approach with some appeal to Unitarians. And I would not be surprised if our fourth principle were instead a free and responsible search for personal truth and meaning. However, while this wouldn't shock me, I'm glad it isn't what we say. The idea of personal truth, of speaking your truth, can be a noble one, particularly when applied to situations in which a marginalized group has been gaslit into accepting their situation based upon a false reality that is forced upon. However, the phrase and concept of personal truth makes me very uneasy, as I worry it may replace the responsible search for the truth with the irresponsible choice of whatever you wish the truth to be. Whether the world is flat or round, we should at least be willing to say that if my world is flat, then your world can't be round. We share the same world as we share the same reality. So let's suppose there is an objective truth that can be, at least approximately, known. How are we to find it? Well, to start, we should admit that if we're searching for the truth, that means we haven't found it yet. We don't know what it is, and no possibility should be dismissed out of hand. This, to me, is the freedom that is part of the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Again, while this sounds straightforward and appealing, it isn't always easy. Does this freedom mean we must respectfully accept and consider racism, Holocaust denial, and QAnon conspiracies? As far as the law is concerned, I think the answer must be yes. But in terms of the communities we choose to build, the associations that we choose to have, and the dialogue in which we choose to engage, some boundaries are both possible and desirable. In fact, they are responsible, which is where the second term in the free and responsible search for truth and meaning comes into play. Freedom and responsibility within the search for truth are not independent goals, but are instead necessary checks upon each other that must work in concert if we want to get closer to the truth. So what is the responsible search for truth? One important aspect is the determination of the questions that are important and still open for debate, and the questions that are essentially settled. No answer can be known with certainty, and we must be open to new information that may challenge our understanding. But to make progress, tentative conclusions must be reached in order to continue the search for truth. But most of all, the responsible search for truth is about how we all approach that search. It's about the methods and rules we follow, which are far more important than any particular conclusion or fact about reality. In the search for truth, how we think is more important than what. This is because with the right system, any particular mistake can be corrected. Okay, well, what then is the right system? I have no easy answer, but I'd like to share 3 guidelines that I think can help. Number 1, to quote Richard Feynman, one of the heroes of my youth, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. It's so easy to believe that you are right and that those shortcomings you see in other people don't apply to you. It's far more difficult to interrogate what is wrong with your current belief system, to ask yourself hard questions, and to realize that you may be wrong. This is particularly true, and what you believe is true is what you want to be true. If we want something to be the case, we're very likely to cut corners, not ask questions, and ignore contradictory evidence. How many people are earnestly convinced that the uniquely true religion just happens to be the religion in which they were born and raised? How many people believe that what God wants them to do just happens to coincide exactly with what they themselves want to do? What luck! The temptation to believe that the truth is what we want it to be is one of the greatest impediments to the responsible search for truth. Nobody enjoys being wrong, which leads me to my second gut. Be careful of the positions that you take publicly. And if you're uncertain, don't pretend that you are not. This is important both because by publicly taking an incorrect position, others can be led astray, and also that because by publicly taking an incorrect position, you make yourself far less likely to correct it. Nobody enjoys being wrong, but in particular, nobody enjoys being wrong in front of other people. It's embarrassing. And when people feel their credibility may be at stake, they will defend positions far beyond the point where it is reasonable. Be careful what you advocate, particularly with great emotion, because as exhilarating as it may be in the moment, what we shout out, we pound in, creating beliefs that can become a part of self-identity that are very difficult to dislodge, even when they're obviously false or even harmful. Number 3, always seek to understand the strongest arguments against your position. It's easy to discount your opponents as stupid and their reasoning is fatuous. Rarely is it true. By understanding the best arguments against you, you're engaging in an act of charity that grants those with whom you disagree respect, elevates the dialogue, and fosters a more understanding world. It also provides you with an opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of your own position and advance your own responsible search for truth. How do you know the earth is round? Is it just what you've been told? What are the best arguments against it, and how would you refute them? What about heliocentrism? Throughout most of history, people really did believe in a geocentric universe. Why? Why do we no longer think this? What about evolution? What about climate change? By understanding the strongest arguments against what you believe, you can strengthen your own understanding and increase the likelihood that you can persuade somebody with whom you disagree. Don't be worried about what you might find out. If what you believe is true, it should become more obvious upon investigation and examination. And if it isn't true, I hope you'd want to know. Just as an aside, while the world certainly isn't flat, it's not entirely round either, or at least it isn't a perfect sphere. In fact, the world is something called an oblate spheroid, squished along the poles and elongated along the equator, such the distance from the center to, say, the Galapagos Islands is about 13 miles longer than the distance from the center to Antarctica. And of course, as we can see outside of our windows, its surface isn't perfectly smooth. However, in spite of these caveats, it's still closer to a perfect sphere than your average polished marble. Finally, why does the free and responsible search for truth and meaning matter? First, it matters because there is a real objective world out there that you must deal with whether you believe in it or not. Tens of thousands of people have died because they were irresponsible in the search for truth about the COVID-19 vaccine and persuaded not by evidence and inquiry, but by crackpot conspiracies. A tragic and unnecessary loss of life fueled by a failure in the methods applied by millions to understanding medicine, and a moral failure within a smaller group who knew better, but chose to mislead people who trusted them to gain attention and some temporary political advantage. Second, it matters because a shared objective truth is foundational for a society in which we all exist and work together. Without an agreed upon method for discerning what the truth is, we'll be unable to even start figuring out what we should do. This is a big problem that we face today. What upset me the most about Trump's election in 2016 was not the prospect of Trump's policies or even his personality in the White House. It was that the world's most prominent birther had been elected president. Birtherism wasn't a policy principle or a policy position or a governing principle. It was just a big lie. We saw another big lie at the conclusion of Trump's presidency, with election fraud conspiracies eventually reaching such a pitch that they led to the Capitol being overrun by a delusional, angry mob on January 6th, 2021. That day had a strange, particular overtone to me, and I'll tell you why. Over 20 years ago, in the weeks before my junior year of college, I was working as a college assistant, which is a combination teaching assistant and resident assistant, for a 2-week intensive program my university offered called Sophomore College. Students would come back a little early before their sophomore year to take a 2-week intensive course upon some special topic, and mine was particle physics. This was in the fall of 2001, and it coincided with September 11th. On that day, classes, of course, were canceled, and we all gathered in the lounge of the dormitory to watch the news. We spent the day talking about what had happened and trying to piece together why and what might happen next. Sitting next to me on one of the couches was another college assistant, part of an international relations class, who I spoke with quite a bit and who was intelligent, knowledgeable, reasonable, and understanding. I remember hoping he'd go into politics. Well, be careful what you wish for. The guy sitting next to me on 9/11 was Josh Hawley, a current senator from Missouri and one of the most prominent supporters of Trump's mad and poisonous attempt to discredit his defeat with lies about non-existent fraud. What bothers me so much about it is that I'm absolutely certain Josh Hawley knows better. But he subjugated his own morals and abnegated the responsible search for truth in favor of his own personal ambitions. Shame on him for doing so. Third, and finally, perhaps the most important reason why a free and responsible search for truth and meaning matters is that, in spite of its imperfections and uncertainties, reality and our place within it is beautiful fascinating, and profound. The responsible search for truth is one of, if not the most fulfilling things we have the opportunity to do within our lives. And the enjoyment and satisfaction to be had in the endeavor is tremendous. The great blessing and the difficulty inherent in discerning truth and meaning is that it means we never need to stop. We can keep asking questions, and we can always be learning. We shouldn't want it any other way. And I'll close with a clip of one of my favorite writers, now dead, explaining this position better than I could hope to do.
I'll close on the implied question that Bill asked me earlier. Why don't you accept this wonderful offer? Why wouldn't you like to meet Shakespeare, for example? I mean, I don't know if you really think that when you die you can be corporeally reassembled and have conversations with authors from previous epochs. It's not necessary that you believe that in Christian theology, and I have to say it sounds like a complete fairy tale to me. The only reason I want to meet Shakespeare, or might even want to, is because I can meet him any time, because he is immortal in the works he's left behind. If you've read those, meeting the author would almost certainly be a disappointment. But when Socrates was sentenced to death for his philosophical investigations and for blasphemy, for challenging the gods of the city, and he accepted his death, he did say, well, if we are lucky, perhaps I'll be able to hold conversation with other great thinkers and philosophers and doubters too. In other words, that the discussion about what is good, what is beautiful, what is noble, what is pure and what is true could always go on. Why is that important? Why would I like to do that? Because that's the only conversation worth having. And whether it goes on or not after I die, I don't know. But I do know that it's the conversation I want to have while I'm still alive. Which means that to me, the offer of certainty, the offer of complete security, the offer of an impermeable faith that can't give way, is an offer of something not worth having. I want to live my life taking the risk all the time that I don't know anything like enough yet, that I haven't understood enough, that I can't know enough, that I'm always hungrily operating on the margins of a potentially great harvest of future knowledge and wisdom. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'd urge you to look at those of you who tell you, those people who tell you at your age that you're dead till you believe as they do. What a terrible thing to be telling to children. And that you can only live, and that you can only live by accepting an absolute authority. Don't think of that as a gift. Think of it as a poisoned chalice. Push it aside, however tempting it is. Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.
I don't know. Thank you all for having me today as your guest speaker, and it's been a pleasure.
Okay, Lindy.
You're gonna do the offering?
Yes. We have a song that and we're
Feel him, no?
fire commitment.
Fire commitment, 1028.
And I'll pass the offering. The half plate offering this week is going to the Warming Center.
Okay, this is the one in 5/4 time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But it really just feels like da, 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 da. Okay? Think about what it feels, not how you count it. Please feel free to stand as you're willing and able. We did some energetic songs today. Let's keep it high energy. Guiding
Lindy. As responsible religious seekers, we recognize that we are privileged to be free, to have resources to pursue life beyond mere survival, to continually search for truth and meaning, to exist beyond bonds of dogma and oppression, and to wrestle freely with truth and meaning as they evolve. This privilege calls us not to be isolated and self-centered, believing that our single perspective trumps all others, but rather to be humble, to be open to the great mysteries of truth and meaning that life offers. And those mysteries may speak to us through our intuition and experience, but also through tradition, community, conflict, nature, and relationships. As a faith tradition, Unitarian Universalism makes sacred the right and responsibility to engage in this free and responsible quest as an act of religious devotion. Institutionally, we have left open the questions of what truth and meaning are, acknowledging that mindful people will, in every age, discover new insights. Reverend Paige Getty, congregation, UU congregation of Columbia, Maryland. Okay. Let us extinguish the chalice with the unison words in the order of service for meeting for coffee, snacks, and continued conversation in the kitchen.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of courage and commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world.